Good evening. Thank you all for joining us today for Dance Like Your Life Depends on It, a World AIDS Day conversation. This evening's conversation is accessible via ASL interpretation and closed caption by clicking on the link in the chat. I am Jairo Ontiveros, Vice President for Arts Education and Community Engagement at the Adrian Arsht Center for the Performing Arts of Miami-Dade County. It is my pleasure to welcome you all into our virtual space to discuss and reflect on an important topic on an important day of remembrance, World AIDS Day. This evening came out of a conversation with the Arsht Center's artist in residence, Pioneer Winter. The Arsht Center commissioned Pioneer to create a new work titled Birds of Paradise, a dance theater piece that raises LGBTQ voices, especially those who have been historically excluded or marginalized. In the spirit of making erased histories visible, we begin by pausing and acknowledging that we are coming to you from Miami, Florida, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Seminole, Miccosukee, and Tequesta peoples. We honor and pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and we invite you to learn more about acknowledging the traditional native inhabitants of the lands where you are tuning in from. The links are provided to you in the chat for your convenience. With intention, this evening's conversation explores the dancing body and radical survival during the AIDS epidemic in the time of today's pandemic of COVID-19. We are excited and we are thankful for the panel that will share their history and their story with us this evening. Before I introduce our artists in residence who will introduce our artist panel, we would like to thank our sponsors, our contributors that make evenings like this special for us at the Arsht Center and our community at large. We'd like to thank the Knight Foundation, the New England Foundation for the Arts, and MAP Fund for their support in the creation of Birds of Paradise. We would also like to thank the Miami-Dade Mayor and Board of County Commissioners, the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, and the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs for their support of the Arsht Center's arts education and community engagement programs. Our moderator for the conversation this evening will be Pioneer Winter, like I said, a Miami-based choreographer and dance artist. He directs the Pioneer Winter Collective, a group of allies, activists, and artists in their own right, whose bodies and voices transform their social, political, and cultural landscapes. Pioneer Winter Collective is a national touring contemporary dance and physical theater company rooted in social justice, community, and queer visibility. Recognized in Dance Magazine's 2019 25 to Watch, Pioneer's choreography has been commissioned by several South Florida universities: Miami Theater Center, Karen Peterson and Dancers, Tiger Tail Productions, Live Arts Miami, Jacksonville Dance Theater, Fundarte, and like I mentioned earlier, the Adrian Arsht Center. Fellowships and awards have included the Dance Miami Choreographers Program, Miami Goes Elsewhere, and Live Arts Labs Alliance. He has curated and directed the Screen Dance Miami Festival presented by Miami Light Project since 2017. Pioneer has been an FIU Honors College Faculty Fellow since 2014. As assistant teaching professor, he lectures in the areas of social justice and art, epistemology, and dance technique and composition in both the Honors College and College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts. Please welcome Mr. Pioneer Winter. Hi, sir,
Hey,
how are you?
Hey, Jairo, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for helping us put this together.
Well, thank you for saying yes to being our artist in residence at the Arsht Center. And I know we have a lot to get to today on World AIDS Day Remembrance. But I wanted to ask you before we begin the evening with the exemplary panel that is about to unfold and unpack the topic of dance and radical survival. The reason I mentioned earlier in my introduction about you that this evening happened out of a conversation that you and I were having, right? And it really focused on the community engagement pieces of how we work with community to create art and the importance of that. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your creative process and how important it is to involve stories and people in the community to really create your final work, the work that people will see on the stage at the Arsht Center in September of 2021.
Yes, yes. I mean, first of all, like I told you on the phone today, one of the best parts about being an Arsht resident artist is being able to collaborate with you all. So thank you again for making this conversation possible. In answer to your question, we really don't split hairs between with the collective between the generative process or the quote unquote creative process with engagement or community practice. They're really in the same vein for us. The other day we were in a rehearsal at the Peacock Foundation studio at the Arsht, and we were sitting there masked and like more spaced out than normal in our circle. And we were reflecting about how our bodies become these containers to both evidence and communicate at time of crisis. And also how our bodies often can be used to question the beliefs and systems that assume our bodies are powerless in the first place. So I think this conversation really came out of us exploring in Birds of Paradise how our bodies can be full of joy, sorrow, rage, but never powerless.
And I think, you know, there's a statement that you bring up quite often with me when we have these discussions, and it's about democratizing dance. And in what you just stated, can you talk a little bit about what that means as a choreographer, as a person that stages work with bodies from different walks of life, different abilities?
Yeah, so I mean, we are a physically integrated dance theater company. We're also intergenerational. The ages of the performers that are part of the collective are between the ages of 25 and 63. So that it's really, it's not even about the work that we're making on stage. It's what we're doing behind the scenes. It's how we come to the work together, how we discuss it. I always bring in an opening concept or vision or task or prompt, but it always becomes affected and steered by the collective as a whole, as everybody is bringing their lived experience to the table.
I think that's what tonight is about, is really, you know, the panel and your experience, your lived experience that we're going to enjoy tonight. I know we could talk for hours about the intersections of engagement and artistic process, but I will leave you to introduce the panel. I want to just thank you from everybody at the Arsht Center for saying yes to being our artist in residence and commissioning the new work, Birds of Paradise. And I look forward to tonight's conversation. I leave you with the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jairo. So my name is Pioneer Winter, Pi for short. I use he and they pronouns. And as Jairo said, I live, love, and dance in Miami, where I get to create with my favorite people in the world, with my dance company, Pioneer Winter Collective. But on this 32nd anniversary of World AIDS Day, we're also remembering millions of people who've been lost over 4 decades. And we're reflecting on this epidemic, which is especially poignant now since we're also being challenged by COVID-19. I was looking today to see what the World Health Organization was saying about our HIV statistics, and since today, or as of today, more than 70 million people have been infected by HIV. About 35 million have died from AIDS complications since the start. And I think it's really important to mention to our audience that you don't need to be infected to be affected. So as we're joining together and remembering and honoring, we're also addressing stigma. We're addressing homophobia and transphobia. We're addressing racism, how classism and racism forces many people to struggle silently while others can be more vocal, why we know the legacy of some and not others. So today I am very honored to be joined by a panel of amazing artists. And if you could just come on camera when you hear your name, those artists are Leonard Cruz, Gabri Christa, Ishmael Houston-Jones, Keith Hennessy, Frank Campisano, and Octavio Campos. Thank you all so much for being here. Before we move into the conversation, would each panelist just give a brief self-introduction, going from Leonard, Gabri, Ishmael, Keith, Frank, and Octavio?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Leonard RVC Cruz. I live in Essen, Germany. I'm a scholar and an artist, and I'm happy to be here. And thank you, Arsht Center and Pioneer, for inviting me.
Hi all, my name is Gabri Christa. I come to you from New York, land of the Lenape. I am a filmmaker, choreographer, dancer, etc. I thank you for inviting me to this panel by and the Arsht Center, and I'm really excited to be here with everybody.
Hi, I'm Ishmael Houston-Jones. I'm also on the traditional homeland of the Lenape people in the East Village of Mannahatta. I use any pronouns that are said with kindness, so I respond to any pronouns. And I'm very happy to be here. And as a preparation, I sort of wrote down the titles of all of the pieces I made in the 80s and 90s, and they go from 1981, Dead, Them, The Undead, Prologue to the End of Everything, Without Hope, and Unsafe, Unsuited. We'll talk more about that later, I think, but I'm very happy to be here with these people.
Hi, everybody. My name's Keith Hennessy, and I'm speaking to you from San Francisco, from the Mission neighborhood on the traditional lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone. Yeah, just super happy to be here. I think from now on, my pronouns will be expressed the way Ishmael just did. I respond to any, as long as they're said with kindness. Yeah, this conversation is very big. I think many of us of a certain age, our work really is born within the context of AIDS. Everything we do was shaped by our coming out as humans, as dancers, and as sexual beings all at the same time within the context of a crisis. And that marked the work, whether we were making a work about AIDS or not. Although many of us clearly did make work about AIDS or in response to the crisis. So I'm here, it's, yeah, everything to be continued.
Well, hello, thank you, Keith. My name is Frank Campisano. I am a dancer, performer, artist with the Pioneer Winter Collective. I am also the oldest member. I'm 63 years old. I come from a ballet background. Most of my life, that's what I performed, and it was pompous and beautiful and strong. And there was never anything really set on me during the AIDS crisis. Everything was beautiful. Everything was colorful. Everything was glamorized. And so there was no room for that in most of my career until I joined the company in 2016, and we started creating work based on realness. That's who I am.
Thank you, Frank. Hi, everybody. Hi, Miami 305. This is Octavio Campos. I am a proud Miami native, and I am currently living in Chicago, the land of the Potawatomi people. And I am very excited to be here because I think before the Arsht Center was the Arsht Center, it was the Miami Performing Arts Center, and I was the original black box artist there, and made a lot of queer work in the early 2000s when the center opened. And I'm just super happy to be here. Thank you, Pioneer Winter, for making this happen, for bringing me back home through this portal, and for being able to touch some of the beauty that is Miami, and also the horror that is Miami in this time, and what it did, and then in that time that I was there making queer work, and the horrific things I discovered about the virus, and how it lived in the underbelly of the city. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about those productions that I made with some amazing collaborators that I found in Miami, and the Bug Chasers and Blue Live, and I'm excited, and 1000 Homosexuals. So I'm really excited to be here and open up this big conversation, as Keith said. And I'm very blessed that that I can do this with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here again. This is such an honor. It's a privilege, and I am very surprised that all of you said yes when I asked. So thank you for being here. This is a big thing, and I guess there's no right way of starting a conversation, but I wanted to offer up one quote that was by Patrick Scully, that was a collaborator with Ishmael and with Keith. He said, "When your friends are dying, you damn well better be paying attention." So can we start off the conversation with talking about that moment where people were damn well paying attention? Those demonstrations of life, the urgency, what was that AIDS moment like? And especially looking for any anecdotes that you have about working individually or in a company, whether you were in New York or you were on the West Coast. So I'm
going to start because immediately
yes.
I got an image immediately when you said that. And I remember when I was at SUNY Purchase at school in 1987, and the virus had started. It was like full on. And one of our teachers, our Graham teacher, Bert Terborg, which rest in peace, was getting sick, and we didn't know how you got it at that time. It was like, they said you could get it by sweating on people. And what were we doing all day long? We were sweating on top of each other. And I remember being afraid to sweat. I remember that feeling of terrified to not sweat too much, or not be near anybody that sweat too much. And that was one of those moments where it's like, this is real, and we don't know how it's contracting itself. And I remember that as so vivid, and seeing our teacher and coming and doing the contraction and touching us and being terrified, like the whole time thinking, oh my God, what am I going to get this? You know, am I going to get this? So yeah, that's my anecdote really quick, because that was for me the AIDS moment. I'm like, okay, here it is.
Okay, I'm going to pick up from where you just started, Octavio. I was in the ballet world when this was happening, and I didn't want to be stigmatized. I didn't know. I was in a very serious relationship, so I didn't think I was going to be affected by this virus. Lo and behold, little did I know that my partner at the time was infected and indeed had AIDS and never told me. And he infected me. I loved him. I didn't think that anything was going to happen to me. I just felt invincible. I was young. I was strong. I was beautiful. I had New York City in the palm of my hand when this was happening. I could go anywhere, and they would open the doors and roll out the red carpet, and I could go in. And I remember thinking, when I found out that I was infected, and I was in rehearsals, who do I tell? Because I'm going to be sweating. What if something happens to me? What if I cut myself lifting a girl? What if I cut myself? What if anything happens to me? Who do I tell without being pushed away or out of the company or abandoned? So I kept it a secret. And it was a horrible, horrible, horrible feeling for so many years. And thank God, to this day, and as I said, I'm 63 years old, I have never been sick or had any complications from this virus, with the exception of a period of time in my life, which was not very long ago, where I was doing drugs. And I stopped taking my medication because I was using, and I developed thrush. That was the only complication that I have ever had. And I think I was diagnosed in the late 80s, early 90s. And I never thought that I was going to be affected. I was in many long-term relationships. My partners all knew because I told them. I never kept it a secret from my partners, but I did from the dance world because of quote unquote, not wanting to be abandoned or rejected, because my identity was, I was a dancer. I started when I was 7 years old. I didn't know what my life would be without it. And it wasn't until I moved to the Miami area that I had to come out about it. You know, with people. It was kind of devastating because that's when I really had a problem with, oh, well, you're HIV positive. That means that I can't date you. That means that I have to reject you because I don't want to get it from you. I didn't have to deal with that before because I had been in relationships. Now I was on the dating scene in a new city from New York or Boston. I went from New York to Boston to Fort Lauderdale, Miami. And I was stigmatized when I got here. And mostly through social media. Not even through real contact, because I mean, I didn't even know about social media until I came to Miami. I couldn't afford that, not financially, but because as an artist, my body, I'm a dancer, needed to be strong. My brain needed to be strong so that I could absorb choreography and have the strength to carry that vision out. So it was a struggle for me. So I could totally relate to what you're talking about. I'm going to sweat on this girl. Is she going to get AIDS from me? I am now undetectable. Thank God. And I hope to remain that way for the rest of my life. I'm doing everything that I am supposed to do in order to do that. I'm married now. I have a lovely husband who is not from this country. Yeah, I mean, it was very much being afraid of the stigma behind it for me. I never worked with choreographers other than Pioneer Winter, who actually in the second piece that I ever did with the Pioneer Winter Collective was called Forced Entry and Other Love Stories. And there was kind of a duet between Pioneer and I where he was on a microphone and he was pounding me with questions, interrogating me. And it was all about, you know, me being HIV positive and how did I deal with that? And who did I tell? And my drug use. I mean, I got addicted to crystal meth. When I moved to Miami, Fort Lauderdale, it was because I had to leave the classical world of ballet. My body couldn't do it anymore. I was in my late 40s when I moved here. And I didn't know what I was going to do because my identity was, I'm a dancer, but I'm also HIV positive. What's going to happen to me? I didn't know. I was unsure. I mean, I don't want to go on and on about this because I want other people to have more time. I'm sure we'll get to more of this later on in this conversation. But yeah, it was definitely the stigma. And early on in my career, I was silent. I was very silent about it. I didn't want anyone to know. And I think that Michal Zurich, who is now the artistic director of the Festival Ballet of Providence. I worked with them off and on for 10 years. And I remember telling him, and he was fine. I said, if anything ever happens to me, I need you to know this. And it took a lot. It took a lot for me to be able to say that to him, because I took a chance. I took a chance on being pushed away, but I also didn't want to infect anyone.
Thank you, Frank. So, I mean, jumping off of that, you were talking about in the ballet world that it was the stigma was seen differently. Could anyone from the panel talk about the downtown dancing and Ishmael, perhaps,
Sure.
or Gabri?
Oh, sure. I was just thinking that our worlds are very different. There isn't one dance world. As I alluded to in the titles of my pieces, I was addressing in the 1980s, 90s, I was really addressing AIDS profoundly affected my work. And I was thinking also about how the historicization and how work is seen, because in 1986, I did a piece called Them with the writer Dennis Cooper and composer Chris Cochran. It was a piece for all male dancers, male identified. And we added an AIDS coda, because when we did the work in progress, it was like using Dennis's text, which is very queercore, but we didn't actually address AIDS. And then when we made the piece a full length piece, we decided we needed something. So my fear of death and dying led me to create a duet for myself in the carcass of a dead goat. And I danced with this dead animal because I'm afraid of mice and mice traps. Like I'm a total wimp. So I did this dance with the carcass of a goat, and the piece was excoriated. People hated this piece. It's particularly the gay press. The gay press, I got the most negative review I've ever gotten in my life from the gay press because of that piece. Fast forward 25 years later, in 2010, we revived the piece at PS 122 in New York. And I guess there was enough distance that people could appreciate what we were saying about the horror of the era of the 80s and 90s. But one thing is that Chris, Dennis, and I had to explain to dancers, some of whom were born in 1986, what that horror was. And it wasn't so much about translating the movement, because the movement is all improvised, but translating the feeling and the emotionality and the fear and the anguish that we were all feeling. Like most of our rehearsals were not spent dancing or moving. Most of our rehearsals were spent trying to get into these young dancers' heads, like what that era was like. And that was the most challenging part about that translation, was the most challenging part about remaking and reviving that piece.
I wanted to talk, Pioneer, about
Please.
my coming into my experiences with the HIV and AIDS community and dance community. When I was an undergraduate student at UCLA, summer workshops, I took Graham with Tim Wingard. He was fading away with the virus. My first ADF was with Lee Connor. He, throughout the years, I stayed in contact with him, and he was slowly passing away. And then I remember my last year at UCLA, Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane came, and Arnie was sick, and I knew that he had AIDS. And it was just interesting because I joined the company in 1989, Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane. Arnie died in 1988, so it was a very fragile time. There was social stigma for someone young coming from an undergraduate graduate program, having no experience of what was going on with the dance world. I was thrown into a world where Bill really wanted his dancers to be not only dancers on stage, but activists. And it was a lot for me to handle and deal with, because Damien Aquavella was dying of AIDS. They Bill choreographed D-Man in the Waters for him, and he was dying. And when I joined the company, they were rehearsing in terms of how to carry him on and off stage for D-Man in the Waters because he could no longer walk. So, so it was a lot for me in terms of joining a company with Bill HIV positive, Arnie passing away, Damien dying, and a lot of my teachers dying as well. So I just wanted to say what's important for me and what I've learned from Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane is that, and I think which is important for the dance community is how do we as artists not only just be dancers that move, but also tell stories and are activists in what we believe strongly in. And so, yes, this past month, the dancers of Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane, during this pandemic decided to bring back continuous replay. And so it's on YouTube right now that you can view 44 alumni and present company members of Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane performing continuous replay. So continuing the legacy of our mentors, our icons, our loved ones who have died of AIDS. And I'm sure Gabri can talk more about another piece that Bill had choreographed specifically on AIDS.
Yes. Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you. I want to say it's so moving to hear everybody speak, and I find it a very emotional subject. I moved to New York in '93, and AIDS was definitely around in Amsterdam and Cuba, where I was living before. And AIDS and the whole episode, or not episode, the whole pandemic, really, there was the other pandemic, came hard to me because I moved into an apartment with my girlfriend, Alexis Wilson, who was the daughter of Billy Wilson, choreographer with Ailey, with Dance Theater of Harlem, also the first Black male dancer at a Dutch National. And he and his husband, Chip, were both HIV positive, and I was living with Alexis, went to their house, and that was the first time I actually really was in close contact with them, and became friends through her. They raised two children. One of them, as I said, is Alexis, and she wrote a book about this as well, so it's a beautiful book to read. And it was a really interesting time and difficult time also, and they died of AIDS, both of them, as I entered Bill T. Jones to be there for Still Here. Still Here was actually about terminal illness, not just AIDS, but predominantly AIDS. And during the workshop period, we met people throughout the country, and then we would go and perform. Often, a lot of them were not there anymore, and that was hard. When Pai asked me to do this, I was like, what can I say as a woman? And I realized how much I've been affected actually by it, and how many people as a dancer and people around me have either passed away or people are still around, such as Sean Ruff. And I asked him today to talk. He was the development director at Bill T. Jones. He just wrote me saying, a different time, a different plague. My D-Day was summer 1987. Looking back on this painful epoch, I realized it was also one of blossoming. I quit my publishing job and worked for a private doctor in an AIDS practice, managing his office, teaching exercise to patients and playing surrogate family to those lacking family, especially during frequent and protracted hospitalization. After a lot of death and heartbreak, I started volunteering for Bill T. Jones with the goal of helping propel the company from the brink. In a short time, I made an impression and money, and Bill and Johanny offered me a job and a one-way ticket to living life. I'll be 62 this coming birthday. remarkable feat considering I didn't imagine living past 27. Infinite gratitude. He's a beautiful writer, seanruff.com. Highly recommend also his book, Fin Letter. But he's one of those close friends. And I've been living with him as a friend, living with HIV also. And also one of the many friends I met while at Bill. So just want to share that. I also wanted to say that there are women affected.
Yes.
And so I didn't want to make it about that, but I just want to say that it's there, and also worldwide, and specifically also in the African continent, where using condoms is a huge stigma. So I want to say to Leonard that I too, being a Bill, the thing I got most from him is sort of the activist stance and learning how to speak about what is important. And I thank you for doing this.
Yeah, there's actually a question in the Q&A already. Do you all think artists should be activists, especially in HIV/AIDS? Why or why not? So I think that's a hell yes. So according to what we've been talking about so far. So thanks, Rosen, for asking that. Keith?
Yeah, that's a good place for me to come in, because it's my entry into the dance world in the late 70s, early 80s was within the context of being a very dedicated activist, someone who was very identified with street protest, which is at least as influential in the history of my work as the dance classes that I took constantly. Like Leonard, it's intense to think about how we came into these places as young people. And it's like, my first teacher in San Francisco was Joe Alo, and that would have been in 1982, and he was dead before the end of the 80s from AIDS. I was very engaged with a dance practice called contact improvisation, and because I was in San Francisco, one of the leading sort of groups of people who taught was an all-male company called Mangrove. There was only one gay member of that group, James Tyler, and he also died of AIDS. So for us, there was no separation from it ever. And I think where the activist part, which was very alive in San Francisco, I think unlike, previous generations of dance, by the 80s, in my worlds, everyone who was gay or queer was out. It was the opposite of hiding it. It was a very activist milieu. And one of the things that was going on in the dance world was that we were constantly doing benefits. We would do a benefit for an AIDS organization, and 5 or 10 different dance companies would all perform. And then we would do a benefit for a person who was ill. And then we would do a benefit to raise money for someone to make a work responding to AIDS. So there was this very beautiful kind of communal practice that doesn't really exist in San Francisco the same way today. It doesn't exist with crowdsourced funding. The way to make money used to be to get everyone into a room and throw their money down in that moment. So, and the culture around AIDS, between the art making and the activism and then the service work, right? Like the caring for people with AIDS, they were all very connected. So I danced from 1985 to 1994 with a company called Contraband. And Contraband was a company directed by Sarah Shelton Mann, but it was very collaborative how we functioned. We were very identified as a kind of activist space for dance, but we were also very involved with a sort of a California approach to ritual, right? We saw our work as healing pieces. We saw the bringing together of community as a ritual act. My first piece that really directly addresses AIDS is not until I make my first solo work in 1988. And that piece was called Saliva. And as Frank and Octavio have both spoken to, this whole thing of the fear of touching people and the fear of the sweat, and we didn't know if it could travel through saliva. And by the late 80s, we knew that it wasn't saliva. We knew how it was transmitted, but there were still all kinds of bodily fears. So the first solo work that I made was called Saliva. It was performed outside. I think later a clip will be shown from it, but not a clip, but a photo. But at the piece was performed outdoors, under a freeway, illegally, everything about it illegal, including me being naked outside in the city. And the closing act of the piece, I presented this large glass bowl and moved through the audience and encouraged the audience to spit into the bowl. And with the collected saliva of the audience, I mixed it with pigment, but I also mixed it with a lube that had a chemical in it that at the time we thought killed HIV. And I mixed all of these things to get non-oxynol 9, if you remember those days. And I mixed the non-oxynol 9 with pigment paint, and I drew on my body with the audience's saliva. And the closing dancing was done sort of in this sort of ritualistic reclaiming of body fluids and our ability to be together. So those are some of the stories I could share. And before moving on, I just want to say, because like Gabri, I'm finding this very moving to just hear from people. And, you know, like that, Frank, that you're here is really important, because it's like this whole notion of like, I think that current generations don't know that there was a period of time, and I mean a period meaning like 15 years, where we thought everyone with HIV was going to die. And the death rates were so high in our little niches of dance and gay culture and queer scenes that we really thought everyone would die. And it was a huge break to get to the mid 90s and realize not everyone's going to die. So I don't know, that's just feeling very present with me. I see that Jack Davis just threw into the chat, who's a very close friend of mine and a collaborator of mine since the 80s. And he was always saying this text, remember when our body fluids could heal, which was very connected to the piece Saliva. The last thing I want to say before passing the mic is I'm carrying into this memory of grief, a very present grief right now, because a dancer in my immediate community had just died 2 days ago, and that's Kathleen Hermersdorf. So I'm feeling her and I'm bringing her into this moment. So thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, I want to jump in with that, because Keith, you said some amazing things, and I want to bring it back home to Miami, where it's actually God's waiting room for death. I mean, there's all types of people coming to Miami to live out their last days. And I remember when I came back from being in Europe in 2002 to Miami, everybody was cashing out their viatical, their insurance policies and living large in Miami and talking about activism. I mean, I was a part of so many white parties and the winter party and the big fundraisers at Vizcaya, where everybody wore white and everything was virgin and beautiful, and everybody, you know, living their best life, like spending money, going crazy, like giving money to, you know, the circuit party, you know, the big circuit party. And then that time I was still pretty and had a good body and dancing around. I was dancing a lot in these fundraisers at the Snowball and going at 4 o'clock in the morning, passing out popsicles to people, you know, that were sweating all night long, and realizing that how convoluted that space was, that political, that space of caring, that space of giving, that space of dying. It was like the celebration of death, but in a very, very fabulous kind of jet set kind of way. I mean, when Miami Beach was really still kind of virgin in a way, in a fucked up way of virgin kind of space. And I remember being a part of that culture on that porch, you know, that pioneer woman dress. I mean, being the artist at the opera house, you know, having that opportunity to showcase work that would normally be seen in a basement or a PS 122 or in some messed up warehouse out, you know, in Brooklyn. You know, I was actually able to present at a platform that was considered high art, you know, and the work that I presented at the Arsht Center was at first not really very well received. Actually, I got a lot of criticism from my community because I wasn't using beautiful bodies and I wasn't presenting things nice and clean. And I was digging into what all these beautiful parties and these white gatherings were about, because there was a lot of darkness. And which brings me to my piece Bug Chasers, which was the piece that kind of turned me around and made me want to stand up and not just be a vehicle or a body that was representing other artists' voices and making aesthetically interesting work, but no, really challenging the status quo and bringing out a subculture that nobody really knew about. And with the Bug Chasers, which is basically the young people coming that were being discarded from their communities, from their small little towns in Gainesville or Ocala or wherever, and coming down to Miami or Fort Lauderdale, where all the beautiful people were, and buying into that HIV culture. And I was finding through my research as a dance maker what young people were doing. They were giving their Medicaid cards to doctors and actively searching out the HIV virus and getting salaries and getting money by doing this, and just wanting to have the disease, because if you did, you were immediately invited to the party. You were at the white ball. You made everything was beautiful, and that was really disturbing to me as a gay man, with, you know, in the middle of my career. And it was, so to bring that to the surface, and then to realize not only was it just gay people, but it was also senior citizens in old age homes were bug chasers too, because they realized, oh, if I'm in my old age home and I can get this virus, I'm going to get better benefits and my meds will be covered. So let's all be bug chasers in the old age home. And so for me, the whole environment of Miami that's had this gloss and this sheen and this kind of nightlife and this kind of glamour was just so twisted and so confusing to me as a man. And at that time, I was still negative. At least that's what I thought. I was negative, because when I became positive in 2009, 4 years after that piece, I was considered a naive case, which is what they said to me, which was that I was like, I'm a naive case. They thought, you contracted this disease in the 80s and it's been dormant in your body up until now. And I thought, oh my God. So my art and my life and my world and my body all just kind of crashed in 2009 with so many things. And a lot of great work came out of that. And you'll be seeing some pictures of it later on. But I just wanted to support what Keith was saying about the activism, or what everybody's saying about the activism and our role as bodies that are still here and alive, and how we kind of excavated through that time and created work that was relevant to that time, and to make people talk and to bring it to the surface. So yeah, but Miami is beautiful, honey. It's a beautiful place.
Octavio, I love you. And as Keith had put in the chat, you are still pretty.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, you know, you guys are all talking about a time period that I remember where you were activists and I wasn't. I was silent because my world was different than your world. I was in New York City, and like the title of this, Dance Like Your Life Depends on It, I did. And in between gigs, I did off-Broadway tours, Broadway tours. You know, I was dancing. And in between my gigs, and I was also a model with big agencies, doing TV commercials and all kinds of stuff like that. But in between gigs, I was also a stripper. I danced in New York City at the Gaiety Male Burlesque Theater, the premier burlesque theater for so many years. And I made so much money. And this was during the crisis. And it was filled with bridge and tunnel people. People from New Jersey, people from Brooklyn, people from Queens, people from Long Island. All these men had families. And they would come to the Gaiety Theater to see me take off my clothes and show my big dick. Dance for My Life, I made tons of money. I went to Europe. I toured the world. You know, I am not silent about that now. I'm honest about that now. Would I have admitted it then? No. But I'm okay with that now. I'm an open book. Right now, I don't fear. I don't fear who I am, what I've done, where I've been. It is what made me who I am today. And today, I am a true artist. I am an activist. I am the best version of myself that I could possibly be. And working with the collective has enabled me to honestly look at myself and use all of these experiences to create my art now at 63 years old. But I have stories that will make your heads turn around. And I don't need to go there. But I just wanted to reflect a little bit on how we come from different places and how much I would have loved to have been part of your work, Keith. And Octavio, thank you so much for when the Pulse shooting happened. And you asked me if I would be just lay on the floor in white and put pictures of all of the young people. I'm sorry. All of the beautiful people that were murdered for no reason. It was, Octavio, I just love you for that. You know, thank you. And I'm sorry that you left Miami so shortly after that I didn't have a chance to work with you anymore. But I would love to. I would have loved to, and
It's
I still
coming,
would love
Frank.
to.
It's coming. We'll do it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it.
I'm sorry. I'm a super sensitive guy, so it's really hard for me. I wear my heart on my sleeve. My mother used to tell me that all the time. You got to stop wearing your heart on your sleeve. But it affected me in a big way, and I was really touched that you saw who I was without knowing me, really knowing me, and gave me that opportunity to be amongst other artists and create that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
I wanted to
Yes.
continue about this nudity aspect because Bill was known during 1989, 90, 91 with a piece called The Last Supper at Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I was an original cast member of, where he, well, nudity was something he introduced as well, bringing back Arnie Zane's continuous replay. And I was in this original cast, so I was brand new to the company. So nudity was happening right then and there in all of the pieces. And it just took a while for me to really be open with that. And Last Supper at Uncle Tom's Cabin demanded the 42 cities that we traveled to that we find community members who would be nude with us at the end of the piece and dance with us. So this was very interesting in terms of, because I believe, and I remember that 1990 was the NEA 4, and Bill was on that questionable whether he should get funded or not. So he really pushed the buttons to really make people see and think. And so nudity was really big in Bill D. Jones, Arnie Zane's company from 1989, 90. And I just remember a lot of just being nude a lot of times in continuous replay and Last Supper at Uncle Tom's Cabin. So this is very interesting take when we talk about the body and the diversity of it and of different body types, the LGBTQIA body, the HIV AIDS body. And so Bill challenged the communities when we traveled and performed to come together and to really question all these stigmas through religion, through what comes through colonization and what we believe is art. These were all these questions that Bill was trying to ask in this particular work when I danced with him.
You're talking about nudity in the art world, and one of the shows that I toured with was by the producers of Hair, and it was called Let My People Come. And I toured the United States with it. It was an off-Broadway show, and we started out, the performance started out with the whole cast clothed, and the finale, we had nothing on. The whole cast was naked, and throughout the show, we took off pieces of our clothing for songs that we sang, for songs that we danced to, and everything was about sex. It was during the sexual revolution, which was the AIDS epidemic as well at the same time. And I, for the life of me, can't understand now how that was never brought into play in that kind of, in that kind of theater. I mean, here we are nude, talking about sex and fellatio and being gay. And I remember singing a song, I'm Gay. And it was all about coming out and being gay. And not once was AIDS ever brought into that, because the controversy between nudity and the community, we were refused by theaters. No, we can't have you perform here because you're going to be naked. In the meantime, thousands of people are dying, because nobody talked. It was always shh, 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 shh. You don't talk about it. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you for bringing that point to my mind.
So like with nudity, sex, intimacy, touch, healing, there's also like this danger. Leonard, you brought up nudity, and Frank, you were also talking about it. And Keith, I wonder if you could also speak to the body electric workshops and how community storytelling is driven by opportunities like that. Like, be naked with the performers, like be as human as the stories that are being told, right? That so often dance tries to tackle these very human issues with quote unquote superhuman bodies. But really the most superhuman thing is the ability to be vulnerable. So I wonder if you all could talk about how the urgency of the time gave birth to this vulnerability and this ability to resist or to rise above the stigma that was attempting to keep it quiet and invisible.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things on that. And thank you, everybody. This just continues to be very evocative. I wrote into the chat that to fight AIDS was to fight sex shame and body shame, which were deeply rooted in homophobia and sexism and racism and colonialism and capitalism. So in fact, the naked dancer became a figure of resistance. And I would say that that was especially true for both queer and feminist performance, right? Like, those were the people who were really putting the nude body forward more than others. We think about, and then we start thinking about the sort of attempt to repress this kind of work, whether it was, a Karen Finley naked feminist body on stage, or whether it was the naked gay male body on stage, or these other kinds of nudities that were repressed. And yeah, where do I go with that? I think that there's a few things that I would say. Oh, what I wanted to say is that this idea of a figure of resistance or of queer and feminist performances being sort of this pushback is that AIDS was a generator, a motivator of a massive cultural movement. There was in fact a queer eruption that happened through the late 80s into the 90s that profoundly shifted everything, all aesthetics, performance, dance, everything. And much of that was in response to AIDS. So one of the things, and it's what Pioneer was bringing up, is that I was a teacher with Body Electric in the early 90s. And Body Electric was started by Joe Kramer, who was trying to imagine how there could be a sexual space for gay men within the age of AIDS. And so if semen itself was the dangerous substance, what would be a way to be together, naked, touch, intimacy without orgasm? And so he started looking to different Asian healing practices, where maybe there was ways to start thinking about sex as an energetic project, to think about group intimacy. Today, and these workshops still continue, not just Body Electric, but there are now thousands of teachers in I would almost call a post-tantra world, trying to figure out sexual healing, straight, gay, in-betweens, all arounds. But at the root of a lot of that work is just trying to figure out what is the healing potential of people being intimate together, and can we learn to be intimate together, and can we learn to touch each other with consent and break some of these bonds that, depending on what kind of culture we grew up in, these bonds that are related to religion or to colonialism or to the anti-Blackness of the slave culture. Like, there are these different ways that we carry forward body shames and sex shames that people address through artistic practice, but also through healing practices. Someone just wrote in there Anna Halprin's work, and it's like, Anna Halprin was somebody who was also thinking from ritual to public activism, and she did a number of works that were looking at healing, and she looked a lot at cancer, right? Another pandemic, and then started to adapt her cancer work to people with AIDS. And she led an ongoing group for people with HIV for 2 or 3 years that overlapped with my world, because people in the contraband group were doing the music for Anna Halprin, and people that we knew were dancing with her. And so there was always this, like I say, these overlaps between activist practices, healing practices, the cultural explosion in response to AIDS, and actually just dancing, what we thought dance was, what dance companies could be, what choreography was, right? Like Ishmael bringing his mother on stage, or Bill T. Jones inviting 30 naked people or 50 naked people in a city. It's like, these were new approaches to choreography that Anna Halprin is, of course, one of our great grandmothers of all of this work. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking, and I said that in the chat, that what do you think is that shift that happened besides sort of the political shift? Because I really almost feel nostalgic for the kind of performance work, even though we have activism now, nudity and body, it seems to be more shameful. And we know that in the society, but what is happening in dance? I was just really curious about that. I don't have an answer, but I was thinking about it as we were talking. Maybe Keith or Ishmael. I mean, I talked in the beginning about Ishmael's piece that has been so profoundly touching to me that he did in the 80s.
I'm going to try to jump in there, Gabri, because I remember, like, well, first of all, the idea of disease as and the hierarchy of the disease model, like, where does cancer live in relationship to AIDS, relationship to COVID now? Like, there is a definite kind of like hierarchy. But when I think of, like, I don't know, like the early 2000s, like when Sasha Waltz was doing that Kerpa piece, you know, like, I think that was really like one of those moments where I thought, okay, it was this naked body again. There was a lot of naked bodies in Europe performing and also in dangerous environments, not necessarily only in clear theater spaces that were clean, but also like in warehouses, and how that translates. I mean, for me, that was an interesting moment of where the body and performance and high art all kind of converged in a really way. I think of that piece, Body, by Sasha Waltz. I don't know why that one comes to mind.
Yeah, Keith just put something in the chat about consent. And I think there's a lot more conversations going on about consent and being naked. So I remember back in the day, like, I would not think twice about asking someone to, like, you know, do whatever with me.
Right.
And now there's sort of more care, more consciousness about that. I think in my own work, I one of the pieces I referenced, Without Hope, was I was doing contact improvisation with a cinder block, which means I always wound up being really bloody at the end because cinder blocks are rough. And just sort of like being able to embrace it and use it as a tombstone and use it as a lover's body. It was made after my friend John Byrne died in 1988. And yeah, I understand what you're saying, though, that there does seem to be more of a, I don't want to say conservatism, but conservatism of the body now than like when Keith and I were youngsters. But and it's interesting, Keith and I are working on a project now with 3 younger people. And it's interesting, the conversations are different. I mean, we're only getting together by Zoom, but besides that, the conversations are different than they were in the 80s and 90s, I think.
What would be the difference be? I'm really just like really curious about that. Just thinking about this. Can you talk about that, Keith or Ishmael? What is it?
I think there's a few things going on right now. And one of them, I think that despite the work that we talk about of Ishmael, of Bill T. Jones, of Octavio and other people, I think that some of the nudity got really linked to a privileged body, to a white body. And where we're at right now is people thinking through, what I wrote was trauma-informed healing, but also what are the multi-generational traumas that are carried through different bodies, through the immigrant body, through the Black body, through the female body. And I think there's been a real, like, I know that in my own work, and it's true, I noticed that in the particular slides that were chosen for today, I'm naked in every single one of them, including a very contemporary photo. But even my own nudity, I play with very differently today. I think that there's a big concern, even just about male genitals in mixed gender spaces, if they weren't, like if people don't have adequate warning that that's what they're going to see and what people, because so many more people are trying to create space for people who have been sexually abused by a patriarchal and racist culture. And so the notion of privileging of a certain strong body or a certain healthy body or a male body is seen more suspiciously. And I think mostly that's a very good suspicion, right? Like that's people trying to turn a culture. And I think some of that has meant that the way to approach care, which I think we're in a politics of care and an aesthetics of care that's very different right now in contemporary art. The way people are thinking through care is linked to consent, is linked to trauma healing. And then it's like, yeah, we don't really need to push everybody's boundaries all the time. That maybe provocation is not as important as care practices. Whereas provocation is like, the audience represents the bourgeois and we need to fuck with them. Whereas care practices are like, we need to rethink ritual in a different way. We need to bring the people who are traumatized and have been excluded because of the ways they've been hurt in the past. And maybe my nudity is not so crucial anymore. Maybe that's a moment, maybe that needs to be reserved for certain spaces where people want that, but that people should be able to opt in and out of it. So that's some of the things going on.
That's beautiful, Keith. That's perfect.
Yeah,
That's perfect.
Thank you. That's beautifully said.
It really is true. And there was an interesting quote by Israel Sands. Hello, Israel. There is no conservatism of the body now. What we have now is a fear of crossing the line into sexual harassment, the Me Too. I mean, it's even with just the gendering situation, it's so, I mean, you're walking on eggs all the time. And I mean, I'm not making a lot of work right now, but I'm watching others make work. And I'm so proud of still the rebels that are still not caring and just going, but the restrictions and the stuff that has to be, the corners you have to cut, and the permission and the consent and the gender and the they and it becomes overwhelming. I mean, as a creator, you just write off the cuff, unless you're supporting yourself, there's always going to be some institution, some entity, some government, someone that's not going to be with it and try to destroy, what you're trying to say. And I commend those that are still making work out there. I really do.
Yes, thank you, Octavio. And definitely there's a distance between the visibility of some bodies and the invisibility of others, and how what you were saying before, Keith, about how some bodies might not need to be addressed right now because they've been addressed for the last 40 years. It makes me think about Brotherhood Dance with Ricardo Valentine and Orlando Zane Hunter. Ishmael, you worked on curated something that they were involved in, and you were talking to me earlier about how these new voices and this new reflection of the reflected that was often left out.
Right. Well, one of the hats I wear, other than choreographer, is a curator, and I was invited to curate a platform at Dance Space Project here in New York. And it was a platform that was inspired by my work with the choreographer John Burns, who died in 1988 at age 35. And he was a white gay man. And it started a lot of these things, as I said as Jairo said in the introduction, starts with conversations. I was having a conversation with Judy Hussey Taylor, who's the director of Dance Space, and we were talking about loss, like this whole generation of muses and role models and mentors that were lost in that 15-year period between AIDS being identified by the New York Times, which means it was real, and 1996 when the drug cocktails were introduced to this world. So we're dealing with these 15 years. And I realized that I needed to find a younger co-curator. So I asked Will Rawls. So there's a 30-year gap in our ages, because I wanted to look back at the 80s, 90s, the 15 years of AIDS hysteria, which is how I began identifying those years. But seeing how that absence created, like, where is work informed by AIDS now? And what we came to realize is that AIDS had been often identified as largely a disease of gay white men of a certain class. I mean, that's how it was presented in the news. That's how it was talked about. That was the discourse. That's how the drugs were tested and marketed to. And we realized that was never true. That was never the demographic of who was most affected by AIDS, and it certainly is not now. So Will and I are both African American. We had sort of carte blanche to do this platform, to curate this platform. And we brought people in like Brotherhood Dance, Zane and Orlando, and other younger dance makers of color, both HIV negative, HIV positive, HIV don't know. And it was interesting that the theme just sort of naturally evolved in the fact that we wanted to recognize that there were women, there were trans people, that there were people of color who were largely affected and largely erased from the history of AIDS. There was a huge erasure of that. So we did this 8-week platform in which Bill T, Will and I, the first evening, Will Rawls and I interviewed Bill T. Jones about his work with Arnie and showed clips. Neil Greenberg did his talked about his Not About AIDS dance that he made about his brother dying and his own coming out as HIV positive. Archie Barnett did a sort of tribute to Willie Ninja, because we wanted to pay attention to the fact that, like, the House Vogue community was affected by this, that there was a large swath of people who had been affected by HIV/AIDS that were not prominent, that didn't have their work out there. And yeah, and it was very enlightening. It was enlightening for me because even in my sort of like woke mindset, I think, yeah, I know that, but to just sort of say, oh, it is not, it's not a disease of only gay white men. And that is a very ahistorical portrayal of who is most involved and most affected by AIDS.
You mentioned, Ishmael, something about, the cocktails. And I remember, like I said, when I found out, and my boyfriend at the time, who had infected me, had passed away, I thought I was invincible and that I was not going to be affected by this. I wasn't taking any drugs. So my immune system dropped. My CD4 count dropped. And I was actually diagnosed with AIDS, not HIV positive, but now with AIDS. And what they gave me was, what was the first drug called? AZT. And I remember what it did to me as a dancer. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my feet. I developed neuropathy. As a dancer, how was I going to perform? How was I going to use my body if I took this drug that was going to keep me from dying? So I didn't take it. And thank God they came up with other things, other cocktails to combine and do what AZT, what they thought at the time was going to be the cure or whatever. So yeah, just a note on what you had mentioned, Ishmael. Thank you.
The ballet dancer Eddie Sturley, in his book A Dance Against Time, he was with Joffrey Ballet. I read this book 10 years ago, and I was 22, and it had a huge impact on me because as a dancer, I think that dysmorphia runs really rampant in our community. We're never happy with the bodies we have, even if those bodies are still keeping us here. And I recall from like one section, it was being described how AZT was causing this extreme weight loss in Eddie Sturley, and how for all of his professional life, it was very short one, he was always fighting to have the proper ballet body type. And he noticed kind of grimly and that his emaciated body was finally the classical ballet prototype, even as he was too weak to be able to complete bar because of AZT. So it's something that's really stuck with me, that medicines were not always working, and there was a period of like 15 years. It was said earlier where there was this transition from AZT to other more reliable drugs, and but that still hasn't stopped stigma. That still hasn't changed the way the bodies are erased. And as we're starting to come towards the end of the conversation, I do want to make sure that we are responding to some of the Q&A questions. There was one in particular that I would like to ask you all about, that Adele Myers asks, could anyone speak to the ACT UP protests, in particular the die-in show, so the performance of protest? Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone want to?
I'm just changing my sign just to, go with the themes, but I mean, I think that there are, now as part of the historiography of AIDS, there are dance writers who have written whole pieces about the choreography of bodies in AIDS activism, in ACT UP, and look at the die-in as a very particular kind of choreography. So I'm not sure what more to say about that. I think that ACT UP and AIDS activism in general was never separated from artist community.
Yes.
And partly because of homophobia and sexism and the colonial culture that, Europeans and then Americans specialized in, Western dance has been gendered female, which is already a crime. And gendering it female means that most of the dancers are women and queers, women and gay men. So there was never a separation between who had AIDS and what is dance. And so there was always dancers, performers, artists, visual artists who were very central to the aesthetics of AIDS protesting.
I wanted to add that Bill was very much, and during this time when I was in the company, he was together with Arthur Vilas, and they asked me if I wanted to go with them with ACT UP t-shirts and cuff myself in St. Patrick Cathedral. And I was like, oh, I don't know, I'm Catholic, and this is all new to me. So I just remember always wearing Silence Equal Death t-shirts and ACT UP t-shirts, and going to New York Pride parades and dancing with the other dancers. So yes, no, Bill and a lot of the company members were very much involved in protest as while dancing in the company. I was just a little too young and still not clear with who I was, but it was clearly there that they were protesting just as much as creating work at the same time.
I have a comment from Mike regarding AZT with the addition of steroids to combat the wasting effects of AZT and the use of steroids mushroomed into the gay bi male community, both for its therapeutic value and for its cosmetic value, and in turn created a standard of beauty muscle culture that we see on South Beach in the 90s. So how the body is shaped. And so thank you for that, Mike.
Yes, Mike.
Jeremy Shubrook asks, there are moments in any art form when suffering brings something new to the art form. Is there any idea that you've encountered or included referenced by the AIDS pandemic that's now reemerged in the COVID pandemic?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so themes that were referenced in AIDS pandemic, have any of them reemerged now in COVID? We talked about touch and intimacy, but yeah.
I can speak to it like just today. I mean, all these COVID warehouse, these private parties, people wanting to get COVID. It's again, the bug chaser thing. People think they're going to get it. They're going to be better off if they have it. I mean, I just can't even believe that people are doing that right now. That's one of the things that reminds me of that kind of behavior. Like, let's just get it and get it over with. You know, there's that kind of attitude a little bit.
I think the fear that someone mentioned earlier about sweat, like that there is like I haven't seen that many COVID related dance pieces. One is like everything is happening on Zoom now, so they're not in theaters, but there's sort of like just in the culture of not touch, that touch is illegal, that touch is dangerous. Like even people in teaching, like it's sort of like, even on sort of online teaching, I've noticed that, you know, if people are in the same room, there's this sort of like, we have to stay 6 feet apart. Like there can't be partnering. I'm mentoring a graduate student whose thesis is on salsa dancing, and she's having this horrible time because she's doing her thesis on touch and how it relates to contact improvisation and somatics, but she's working with a dummy, you know, with a mannequin, and it's sort of really queering the way she's beginning to think. And I think like the idea, and I remember someone else mentioned earlier about not wanting to sweat, not wanting to cut. I remember not wanting to drink out of the same glass. If you're sitting in a restaurant and you weren't sure whose glass that was, you're not going to drink out of that person's glass. I mean, yes.
Ishmael, I've come up with a term for the COVID, for people that are going out and touching inappropriately. I call them hovids. The hovid.
Very appropriate.
The hovid. That's what I call them.
Well, I'm not a COVID denier, but I do want to speak to harm reduction, because I think one of the things that some of us learned responding to the last pandemic is different ways to negotiate touch, and that there are ways to think through this, and it does take some effort, but like there is sex where you are not at risk of HIV or where you've really reduced it. And the truth is that that's also true for COVID. The vast majority of us could be hugging, could be butt bumping, could be shoulder rubbing. There's a whole bunch of things we could do. What we know about it, and again, there's so much disinformation. So we don't have central ways of getting information. Even, I mean, information was clearer to get during the early 80s and 90s than it is today, where it's like, whatever you hear 5 things different from it the next minute. But wow. The truth is we're still in a situation where COVID depends on proximity and duration. You literally cannot get it walking past someone with or without a mask. And yet, you know, I live in San Francisco where we're very mask compliant. Even if my mask is down low because I'm walking and there's no one within a mile of me, but if anyone comes near me, even just walking by, I pull it up, and it's a gesture of politeness. It's a gesture of we're in this together. But the truth is we were not in danger. And I am encouraging touch around people. And I'm also testing every single month, consistently negative. I'm really trying to stay in it, but I'm definitely working the edge of where touch is and thinking that we need to be thinking more through harm reduction and negotiated touch and build in this work around consent with smart data-informed choices that are not so isolating. Because we're seeing the isolation is creating more madness in the culture. Gun violence is up all over the Bay Area. The amount of people fighting with their neighbors, their roommates, their lovers, it's like, talk to the therapist. The madness is elevated. So I think as a harm reduction thing, artists and dancers should be rethinking how we can get close to each other, how we can move together, how we can touch each other. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Mike dropped another nugget in the comments. He said, one of the things that reemerges is the notion of making a specific community the boogeyman. So that xenophobia that we see, you know, in the 80s, it was Haitians in the LGBTQI community, and now it's East Asian Americans who are deemed the boogeyman of the earliest onset of pandemic. With regards to that xenophobia and the fear of touch, the fear of other, could you all maybe Leonard or Gabri chime in about the ability to feel intimacy through storytelling, through sharing, through being vulnerable with what you're discussing or what you're sharing, but not having to make physical contact? How are we storytelling in such a way to be able to
Right.
create
I've been
visible
doing workshops. I just gave a workshop at Harvard's Graduate School of Education on storytelling and the possibility to use the creative arts and contemplative practices in order to be more mindful and inclusive when in different communities. I've also done it for LGBT communities in New York City. Storytelling, creative arts, and the contemplative practices. My work as a choreographer right now is dealing with embodied contemporary indigeneity. I know I have indigenous ancestry just as much as I have colonial Spanish ancestry, and having to deal with that, with the DNA, with this, with being the oppressor as well as being the oppressed, and how this lies within the United States. And so for me, this storytelling, I think it's important for people to really share authentic stories that come from past experiences, and not only through movement, but that you can say it in many different ways, not only through spoken word, but through dance, through art, through music. And how do we as well embrace the contemplative practices that have also been around for many thousands of years. So just descaling what we know was colonized and what and coming back to the indigenous ways of being, of ritual, of expressing oneself through the arts, of telling one's story, is important for me and in my work as a scholar and as a choreographer.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know how much time we had, but I'm doing quite, as Pi knows, work around aging, and so I've been giving some workshops around creative aging, specifically for caregivers and dealing with the loneliness of older populations, and how to connect through Zoom, to talking, to storytelling, through memory by using objects, how to connect through this thing, or how to connect to just talking, writing. I'm living, with a mother with dementia, and I've done work around that. But I do think there are ways of connecting here, but also learning, people that caregive, how you can touch, how can that be safe, what is needed, and self-touch. There's also the stigma for a lot of people, especially older population, touching themselves, learning little massage things that they can do for themselves. Yeah, just thinking about the very lonely people out there that are often the older ones.
I want to touch base on that too. Pioneer had mentioned something last week about the gay community is so obliged to youth and beauty that they ignore the fact that we all age. And if you don't embrace that, how can you do it gracefully? It's something that you die, you're born, you die, you get old. I mean, you live, you're born, you live, you have to live your life. You have to embrace it. It's something that I'm coming to terms with too. At 63, I had no idea that I would still be dancing. I'm only now. I mean, if somebody asks me my age, I have a hesitation.
I think it's important, though, Frank, to remember that you're a contradiction to the helplessness and the vulnerability and the stigma of what having HIV, living with HIV means. Like, you are still here, as is everyone in this conversation. So I think that yeah, it's you kind of take us to the next that self-talk and the self-reflection takes us to a question from Glenn, and this is the last one I'll ask before we go into our legacy and names. Would be, did anyone have therapists through the AIDS crisis to help your mental strength? I'm impressed with everyone's strength and tenacity. I hide my true self quite often and tend to shrink, conditioned by fear. It certainly has affected my emotional quality in my dance. So have any of you worked with therapy or other healing practices, contemplative practices that have worked for you in surviving this epidemic?
I think for me, like, dance was my therapy. Making dances, dancing with people, jamming with people, rehearsal, making stuff, like, that was my therapy at the time. That's how I expressed it. That's how my activism was expressed. That's how my healing was expressed. That's how I healed, like, moving in the body, with the bodies, with other bodies was, my therapy at the time. Now I see a regular shrink.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that things have really shifted, because I knew almost no one who saw a therapist during that time. And most of us considered the work itself to be our therapeutic practice. And that if we were going to move in a direction, it was towards more, I think, what Leonard's talking about and what Gabri are talking about, which is adapting our artistic practices with storytelling work, with contemplative work, with people who went into meditation, or the early movements towards yoga, and integrating Tai Chi or whatever. Now I feel like any group of 5 dancers I'm in, 3 or 4 of them are regularly seeing a therapist. It's not my way at this time. When I was younger, I was quite hostile to the idea of therapy because I saw therapy, especially individual therapy, as the failure of community. But that's because I was a hardcore anarchist, critical of everything. And the notion that you would pay someone to be in a room with them seemed so wrong. But like I say, now I feel like you couldn't get through a dance piece without 2/3 of the company seeing a therapist right now. I think therapists are much more integrated into the everyday world, and people are thinking through healing and the relationship of therapy to somebody's art and activism is much more integrated now.
I think the first time I thought of how therapy worked in work was body mind centering with Bonnie Brainrich Cohen. When that clicked in as a young person, I was like, oh my God, I'm doing therapy. But I'm a big believer of therapy now, especially in this time of, like what Gabby was saying, getting older, the older body, isolation, and then this super isolation of being in the Zoom room and lack of touch. I'm a big believer in logotherapy. I'm doing some of that, and I'm working. And I too am a body electric practitioner, which I had forgotten how interconnected it was with the early touch of the 80s, because I learned it in 2000. And that was great to hear. But yeah, I'm a big believer in therapy, and that's what I'm doing.
You were mentioning healing and resistance to Keith, resistance to paying someone to be in a room with them to receive healing from them, and I think that is a funny transition to a more something with greater gravity now, which is that what is the legacy? What is the legacy that we're carrying, that you're carrying, that what has been left behind, and how can we remember those that have been lost to HIV/AIDS, and those that healed us and continue to heal us. So right now, I'm going to put a list of names that we gathered from the panel. And anybody that is watching in the audience is also welcome to add any names to folks that they have known, that have mattered to them, that have meant something to them, whether personally or not, firsthand or not, because we know that someone can have great change even when you aren't physically close to them. And just feel free to add those names. I'm going to press enter now. And these are the names that have been come up with from the panel so far. I wonder if we could read those names aloud, and if anybody feels compelled in the audience to type a name, to offer up a name, we could read that as well. I could start. Arnie Zane, Scott Darnovich, Arthur Armijo, Barry Davison, Bob Reese, Carrie Erickson, Charles Ludlam, Chris Komar. Keith, could you pick up for me with David?
David Vonarovich, Ethel Eichelberger, Frank Maya, Harry Whitaker Shepherd, Jim Tyler, John Byrne, John Sex, Manuel Alum, Michael Bennett,
Michael Schwartz, Reza Abdo, Robert Kovich, Ron Vaughter, Ulysses Dove, Woody McGriff, Robert Joffrey,
Edward Sturley, Rudolf Nureyev, Damian Aguavela, Freddie Mercury, Alvin Ailey, Craig Sachs, Joe Allo, Tracy Rhodes, Peter Cuddick, Essex Hemphill, Sylvester.
Jerome Kaha, Tim Wengard, Lee Connor, Jeffrey McLam, Sterling Houston, Randy Parrott, Bert Terborg, Chris Komar, Peter van der Sloot, Ralph Farai, Bob Atwood, Danny Maldonado.
Brian Fitzpatrick, Paul Russell, Christopher Gillis, Keith Herring, Huck Snyder, Kirk Winslow, Billy Wilson, Chip Garnett, Michael Peters, Carl Bailey, William Adair, Louis Falco, Christopher Gillis, Tim O'Slynn, Chris Komar, Jim Blanc, Donald Rowley, Bill Douglas, Lenny Dale, Juan Antonio, John Stevenson, Troy Edwards, Sasha Vega, Terry Hollis, Ernie Pagnano, Glenn White, Billy Gornell, Alvin Ailey, Wesley Robinson, Bob Applegarth, Marceline Friedman, Bruce Falco, Glenn Dufford, Jean Louis Marin, Tony Constantine, Ernie Horvath. So these are names that we stand on, names that we grow from, names that we remember, and names that we recall when things become difficult, when we don't know what our future is, we can remember our past. At this time, I wonder if our amazing panel could just offer some concluding thoughts, something to leave our audience with. Maybe the thing that's foremost in your mind right now. It could be a word, it could be a sentence.
Hope.
Hope.
Never forget.
Love.
Kindness.
Empathy.
Sobre todo, paz, paz, pero mucho, 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 mucho amor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, everyone. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the participation from our audiences. This is recorded and is available on Facebook. And yeah, just keep going. We're all still here. And on behalf of everyone at Pioneer Winter Collective and the Adrienne Arsht Center, I want to thank our panelists again, Leonard, Ishmael, Gabri, Keith, Octavio, Frank. I couldn't have asked for a more amazing, more nourishing group of humans and dance artists to share this experience with. And we thank you, the audience, for tuning in. So please visit our sites. They are being put in the chat. And if you feel compelled to share your story after tonight, part of Birds of Paradise is seeking out stories. So you can email us at stories@pioneerwinter.com, or you can find us on the Arsht Center website, and as well as the bios and sites and information for the amazing panelists today. So thank you again, and have a beautiful evening, everyone.
Thanks, Pioneer.
Hi, Miami. Thank you, Pioneer. Thank you, Miami.
Miami.
305. Stay alive.
I love you, Octavio.
I love you.
Well, stay safe.
Everybody stay safe, but keep touching each other.
I'll try.
Hold on.
I can't wait to see the work you guys are cooking up. I can't wait.
Neither can
It
we.
was great to meet the rest of you panelists as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, Frank,
Thank
you
you,
were
Frank.
beautiful.